material standard of living. Anything that interferes with the ability of Americans to continue to go deeper into debt or to get cheap, undervalued imported goods will immediately and probably painfully lower the material standard of living of American middle and lower classes. So they are dependent on that. If Chinese goods were to double or triple in price, millions and millions of Americans would face a situation very rapidly where they could no longer afford the basic housewares, clothing, and items that they buy all the time. Particularly at a place like Walmart, which is basically the distribution arm of the People's Republic of China.
Most of the assumptions that our society runs on are false. The major ones, the ones that we use to guide our planning. And these then lead to habits that we have that lead to a very unsustainable lifestyle. We've got a front end and a back end. And the front end goes in resources and the back end comes out waste. And that transformation that happens in our bodies is what allows us to develop and grow. But as an individual, we all reach a certain growth phase where we reach maturation and then we decline. In our economic system, it's the same thing. There are resource inputs to our whole economy. Every widget and gizmo you hold has stuff going into it that got mined from the earth and transported to a factory and turned into something that we now use. And all that produces waste. And that waste we call pollution. So we have this economic system which has resources going in, pollution going out, and the assumption is they can always get bigger. And the problem with that is impossible, absolutely physically impossible. And yet we set up our institutional frameworks, our financial frameworks, and our habits and expectations as individuals based upon the availability of fossil fuel energy. And so we developed a culture that reinforces the idea that we can always get more.
The kind of atmosphere that this planet has is eminently suitable for human life. 1/5 oxygen and 4/5 nitrogen, and then traces of other gases. But some of those trace gases are becoming more abundant than they used to be. And so we have now the greenhouse effect in greater quantity. We have more carbon dioxide than we used to have. And we have some other greenhouse gases that are accumulating that are making the climate of the planet get warmer, which is going to change the distribution of various other species over the surface of the planet. Where you can grow crops is going to change, and we're beginning to kill off some of the life in places that we have been accustomed to interacting with existing species, both on land and in the oceans. We're not only overfishing the oceans, but as they warm up, there are certain species of sea life that will no longer thrive. There are these examples of other species of creatures that exist in finite environments with finite quantities of the resources that they need in finite disposal space and so on. And we can learn from the kind of experience that they have. And one good example is the wine vat, in which the juice from grapes, or some other kind of fruit for that matter, is fermented and turned into wine by the life processes of microorganisms. A form of yeast will do this. And if you think of a crock here in which you've put this mash of grape juice and so on, and you introduce some of that appropriate kind of yeast into it, they multiply and they consume the sugars, basically, that are in that mash, and they convert the sugar into alcohol and carbon dioxide. And the alcohol and the carbon dioxide mostly accumulate, and eventually the concentration of those byproducts of life becomes so great that it kills the yeast cells. So what was at the outset a marvelous, unspoiled environment in which they could proliferate and really live it up becomes an environment in which they can no longer exist. In effect, that's what we are doing now. We are so changing this planet on which we live that we might find ourselves in a position very similar to that of the yeast in the wine vat. So we're not going to like it, but eventually the population of this planet is going to be a whole lot less than 6 billion. The question that we face is, will it come about through voluntary or involuntary means? If it comes about by involuntary means, how horrendous are those involuntary means going to be?
If we follow business as usual with 3 degrees Celsius global warming, the warming on Greenland and West Antarctica would be enough to have a lot of summer melt. And once the ice sheets start to soften up and begin to move, we could get sea level changes of several meters in a century. The big danger about ice sheets is the positive feedbacks that exist. As it starts to melt, it becomes darker, and that means it absorbs more sunlight. So that's one positive feedback. But also, as the ocean warms, it melts the ice shelves, which exist where the ice streams exit to the ocean. And so that opens the gate, and the ice streams move faster. And it lowers the surface, and that makes the surface warmer. And as sea level rises, that will lift the ice at the mouth of the ice streams, and especially West Antarctica. So that tends to unhinge the ice. So there's the danger that these positive feedbacks will cause a situation that begins to run under its own power and just runs out of our control, and we end up with sea level rise of several meters or even conceivably 25 meters, and that would be a global disaster of unprecedented proportions. So the question is, do we want to preserve a planet that resembles the one that we inherited from our ancestors? And if we do want to preserve that planet, then there are going to have to be some changes made in the way that we use energy, the rate that we use energy, and the fuels that we use for it.
Probably one of the most important social questions is how to change behavior. And one of the reasons why behavior is so difficult to modify is because so much of it is automatic. We just react to our current environment. We do things by habit the way we've done them thousands of times before. If you think about making decisions to change your consumption patterns in order to provide a better environment for future generations, in order to reduce sort of CO2 emissions, that involves trade-offs between sort of getting benefits now and getting other types of benefits later. One thing that you find is that people are incredibly impatient as soon as one of the options allows for immediate consumption, immediate receipt of something that they value. So a blind spot is something to which we don't pay attention because it's oftentimes removed from us either in time or in space, and therefore it doesn't threaten us in any immediate way.
There's this great line by Zygmunt Bauman, rational people go quietly, meekly into a gas chamber if only you allow them to believe it's a bathroom. And what he's talking about is that at every step of the way, it was in the Jew's rational best interest to not resist. Would you rather get an ID card, or do you want to resist and possibly get killed? Do you want to move to a ghetto, or do you want to resist and possibly get killed? Do you want to get on a cattle car, or do you want to resist and possibly get killed? Do you want to take a shower, or do you want to resist and possibly get killed? At every step of the way, it was in their rational best interest to not resist. But that's all based on this whole system of make-believe. You have to make believe that what you know is going to happen to you is not going to happen to you. The same thing is happening today. I mean, Zygmunt Bauman says that rational people go quietly, meekly into a gas chamber if only allow them to believe it's a bathroom. And I'll say that rational people go quietly, meekly to the end of the world if only you allow them to believe that buying energy-saving bulbs is going to save the day. So we have all this, and we see this in personal relationships too, in abusive relationships. You see, somebody's in an abusive relationship, they see one little bit of change, it's like, okay, now things are okay, and then they're not okay again. But they see one little bit of movement, now things are okay, and they keep doing this again and again. They have to make believe constantly in order to maintain their place in this wretched relationship. And we have to do it too. We have to make believe that the planet isn't being killed. We have to make believe that money equates to happiness. We have to make believe that you can have infinite growth on a finite planet. I mean, we could list out, dozens of these ways. We have to make believe that the age of oil is going to go on forever. We have to make believe that the people who are living in toxic hell because of oil refineries, that they don't exist. We have to make believe that you can kill a planet and live on it too.
There's no way we're going to fix this mess by adjustments at the margin. That this is about a fundamental rethinking of what it means to be human, a fundamental rethinking of our relationships with one another, our institutions, our culture. And it means exposing and penetrating the stories of empire that keep us locked into this system. They create a kind of cultural trance that says, this is just, it's right, it's the only way it can be. And so all our economic stories about economic growth, about you need wealthy investors to grow the economy, that you shouldn't have welfare programs because they just coddle lazy people. All our stories about money is wealth, people who are making money are creating wealth, and so therefore they own it. This is all clouding the reality that economic growth is really about rich people expropriating the property of poor people and turning it into garbage to make money for rich people, which gives them more power relative to the people who do not have property, are not participants in the financial ownership system and the financial games that it play.
It's always hard to figure out to what extent global economic change is planned and strategized, and to what extent it sort of emerges as a trend that we who do economics impose on a chaos. Honesty, even though it's more frightening, there's no one driving the train. Okay? We're all on the train is moving fast, and we're not even sure where the rails start and stop. So even though it might be disappointing, because some people think in terms more of conspiracy and cabal, I think that it's more chaotic and in some ways more frightening than that. And to the extent that the world is opened up to the market economy, which occurs pretty consistently since the mid-70s, and then really rapidly, what I would call the decade of triumph, the 1990s, which was also the stock market boom, the end of the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, it really took on this heady kind of triumphalism. This is the market economy. You don't have to worry. The market takes care of it. Whatever the market suggests is both right, profitable, moral, and appropriate and efficient. And so just go with it because you know it will take you to a good place. And for many people it did. It really depends on who you are, right? So unfortunately saying how will we survive it, how do we handle it, how do we see it, is difficult because it becomes hard to sustain the we. Different interests, different benefits, different costs.
I dropped out of college for a while, and I worked on these iron ore freighters. We go up here and get a whole load, however many thousand tons of this iron ore, and haul it down, throw it in a blast furnace in Buffalo, run back up and get some more. And I used to think, will we ever run out? And I can remember saying to myself, well, Al, you're just a dishwasher. There are smart people in Washington. If there's any danger of running out, they will act rationally and warn us so that we can reduce our consumption. And I'm ashamed to admit how many years it was before I realized that my trust was misplaced. And I suspect that if you ask any of these people on the street about these problems, you'll most likely find that they have faith that somebody intelligent is looking at these things. And that isn't a justified faith. We have to do our own thinking for ourselves. We can't let other people do our thinking for us.